Good morning, folks. All right. Lots of talks about AI agents, entering production. But the reality on the ground, as you talk to people, is there is a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear, uncertainty around agents actually getting into production. And we heard the panelists talk a little bit about, how people are treading cautiously and thinking about autonomous agents. But the reality is a lot of organizations are still far from being at the stage where they can deploy autonomous agents in productions. But nevertheless, the ground is moving fast and everyone's thinking about how do you get better at what you do and how do you leverage AI agents within production. But there's a lot of confusion around essentially how do you sort of secure AI agents and how do you think about AI security in general. And there's a lot to AI security, and it's hard to sort of peel all of the layers of AI security. But I just want you guys to leave today with a little bit of a mental model on how you should be thinking about agentic applications and use of AI generally within your environments. But before we actually go into the agentic applications, let's talk a little bit about NHIs. There's a lot of talk about NHIs. We've been talking about NHIs for a really long time right now. But even today, if you ask five people in the room about what is an NHI, you'll get five different answers. Some will say, hey, it's API keys. Some will say it's service accounts in your LDAP accounts. Or it could be bots, agents, or what have you, or Kubernetes pods. Again, the answer is not consistent. And this is not theoretical. This is not academical. I talk to many customers on a regular basis, and this is the reality on the ground. The way the security team thinks about what NHIs are is completely different from what the platform teams are thinking or what the developer teams are thinking. And the problem with this is when you're trying to secure a system without having a common understanding of what you're trying to secure, it becomes really, really hard. And we know that again from the like non-human identities perspective, there's the number they outnumber human identities 10 is to 1. We know that almost all non-human identities, as we see practically within customer organizations, are over provisioned. And AI agents are just taking that problem to another scale altogether. So let's start with a very simple taxonomy or like understanding of how you define non-human identities. Here, again, starting with non-human identities, it becomes easier to think in terms of the constructs these non-human identities use, whether these are API keys, whether these are long-lived tokens, IAM roles, or even database passwords. These are essentially, some of these are static, some of these are dynamic. Thanks you, Mr. NHI, for this taxonomy. But here are the different constructs, and they can be, again, they're found in many different places. They're found in your, again, from an IoT perspective, your servers, your desktops, or within your software workloads. All of this is great. This landscape is great to understand the different constructs that exist within NHI. But at the end of the day, you want sort of a simplified mental model about how do you really think about what are the different moving pieces within your, your architecture, if you will. So the mental model is fairly simple. There's three different elements to this. It starts with, like, let's say the human identities or human workforce. These are your developers. These are your engineers. These are folks that want to get any sort of work done. Then there's the non-human identities, which could be, again, your workloads, your services, your AI agents. All of these fall under the non-human identity umbrella. And what they're trying to do and what do they need access to. So these are your resources. These could be your applications. It could be your infrastructure. It could be your dev tooling. Again, this is sort of just sort of simplifying the mental model. And here you want to understand this because and you want to sort of keep these separated. Traditionally, what's happened is that people start with like thinking about credentials. So you're thinking about an API key or a token and sort of working your way backwards up to identity. And what happens with that is you almost always end up in a position where you have overprivileged identities that have overprivileged permission. So starting with, who need, like who is the actor and then what are they trying to access almost always, and credentials are just the main means to prove the identity. So just sort of like structuring those in three different categories helps to simplify the mental model. And this sort of somewhat applies to AI agents as well. So let's talk about AI agents. And I think The panelists were talking about it a little earlier as well. And I don't think there's a common sort of understanding here or even agreement if AI agents are human identities, non human identities. I say it doesn't matter at the end of the day. But AI agents, what they're fundamentally doing is they're amplifying the problems that we have already seen with identity so far. Again, again, it's basically the agents are now creating new risks, and just similar to NHIs, and practically like talking to a lot of organizations and enterprises today on how they are implementing AI agents is they're almost always using a service account, giving it broad permissions, and deploying these AI agents in production. Again, repeating the same mistakes we did with service accounts being over permission. But now the problem is that these AI agents are operating at machine speed, which means someone was talking about, the panelists were talking about taking drastic action. So if a human user sort of is thinking about deleting a database, they may pause for 5 minutes to think about why they're deleting it, but not AI agents. AI agents can do that exact job in like 200 milliseconds. Thinking about just the vulnerabilities of these over permission NHIs as well is, again, over permission service accounts, lateral movement, exploitation, is easily possible. So think about the same patterns as you start applying to AI agents as well. So if we bring whatever we did, the practices that we had for NHIs into AI agents, we are exposed to the same sort of vulnerability. So as you start thinking about agents and how do you sort of build agentic applications and deploy agentic applications into productions, you want to think about these patterns and ensure that you're taking stuff into consideration before these NHI or before these AI agents get into production, so you can essentially sort of control what they are accessing and bringing it under that authorization framework. So essentially ensuring they don't have static or standing privileges that the patterns that we have implemented in the past for service accounts or NHIs. So when we think about AI agents, again, as I said, the reality on the ground is we're seeing a lot of customers actually just using service accounts and giving those broad or persistent permissions to the AI agents, very similar to NHIs. But as you think about AI agents, you really do want to think about like what permissions they have, and not in terms of like I've created this an AI agent and given it a set of permissions, but at the time AI agents are trying to do or perform action, there has to be an audit of essentially understanding what is the action the agent is trying to do, and essentially what again resources they're trying to sort of access. So at the time of request, essentially where it's coming from, what the intent is, and essentially what they're trying to do, based on that, sort of coming up with an authorization or enforcement point, which then allows for the AI agent to take a certain action or not. Now, when I talk to a lot of enterprise customers and we talk about like, hey, how are you thinking about AI security? The answer almost always is around, hey, we're thinking about prompt injections, we are thinking about hallucinations and like things that can go wrong with AI agents. Or best case scenarios, folks will have some ITDR tool thrown in place because hey, we can detect some of the bad behaviors from AI agents. And I think our panelist was talking about it earlier as well. If you do that, great, but the action the bad thing that could have happened has already happened because you're sort of doing that. The whole thing is like after the fact. So as you start thinking about AI agents, you want something proactive. You want to evaluate what the AI agent's trying to do and essentially stop that from happening. And this is where like sort of P0 comes in. We have an authorization control plane for agents. I'm not saying that we solve everything for everybody in terms of AI agents. I don't think you should believe anybody who says that, because honestly, this thing is moving really fast. When we talk about authorization control plane for agents, we are talking about agentic applications. We're talking about agents you've built using any framework of your choice, and essentially ensuring the authorization control or access control that we had for human and non-human identities is now available for AI agents as well. Now, what that really means is that when your AI agents are actually deployed in your production environments at the time that they need access, at the time that they're trying to perform an action, in real time, a decision is made if the agent should actually have that access or not. So we're not talking about persistent access that the AI agents have, but actually looking at enforcement at runtime based on, again, the identity that was invoking the agent. Now, that could be a human or a non human identity. Essentially, what resource are they trying to access and how sensitive that data, how, again, sensitive that data is. And based on that, basically either provisioning access or allowing access or denying access based on that. Now, there's a lot of different things that you can do, but if you had to sort of take away a few things from here today, like it's like, hey, this space is really complicated. How do I go about thinking about how do I bring in some of these practices in sort of like in our organization, or how do I think about agentic security? Here's my recommendation. Start with tool permissioning. So I'm talking about MCP tools here. Think about like what access agents should have. And here I'm not talking about broad access. So it's not like, for an example, hey, this agent should have access to all Slack. No, but get more specific. Like what access should it have? Should it have read access? Should it have access in case of Slack? Let's say it's a SOC bot that's doing some automation. You want it to have read access to a specific channel. So think about adding in, quote unquote, again, this word's being used around quite a bit with AI, guardrails around MCP tools on what they can access at runtime. Think about that really carefully, and you should have a tool or you should have something in place that can enforce a policy to ensure that you can add those guardrails, quote unquote, for the AI agents to just access that. You definitely want to think about what type of approvals or what should the access sort of approval process look like. Yes, it's AI agents, you do not want to slow them down, so you definitely want to think about automating approvals, if you will, but you want to do it in a way where when it's accessing sensitive data. So let's say it's a finance agent trying to do something that it's not supposed to do. You may want a human in the loop. And I think a panelist was talking about this earlier as well. I totally agree. Like, you want it to ensure that especially when the AI agents are accessing sensitive data or any data that you may deem sensitive, you do want some controls in place to ensure that, maybe you want to add a human in the loop for approval. You want to be able to block any of this access in essentially at runtime. So you want to ensure that before execution happens, intent of the agent and what resource it's trying to sort of access and the identity is all evaluated then to showcase essentially if you should allow that request or you should block it. There has to be definitely session level auditability. So you need to think about putting a process in place where you can audit exactly again, what agent, what was it trying to access, who was a human user behind it, who's responsible for it, and then essentially like have all of those logged. So again, when time comes, you have a full audit trail of what the agent did. And again, clear ownership. There's a lot of cases. Again, I go back to the panelists. I think that was a wonderful panel talking about like the reality on the ground is there's a lot of teams that want to experiment with AI agents, but the responsibilities are not clearly defined. And without knowing that, if something goes wrong in production, who's responsible? So ensure there's a model for understanding, a common understanding of who owns the agents and essentially what humans or teams are these agents sort of tied back to. So if things go wrong, you have an approach. P0, as a company, we enable our customers to do all of that. We are the authorization control plane for agents, which means we can help you with defining everything that we just talked about. And yeah, so everything from like adding those guardrails and ensuring you have that full auditability. So yeah, one thing that you want to take away from this conversation is that let's not repeat the mistakes we did with service accounts. We see a lot of people experimenting and going down the same path, but let's not do that. Let's focus on, let's learn from our mistakes in the past and hopefully not repeat those mistakes at another level where the consequences can be a lot more disastrous than what we suffered with service accounts. So yeah, think about that. Think about the runtime enforcement and really think about all the pieces of the puzzle and, think about like agentic security in a more holistic fashion where you're looking at all of these different elements, starting with the actor, what is the job to be done, and essentially what access is being asked for. So you can evaluate and ensure you have the right pieces in place to ensure, again, you're not suffering disastrous consequences of adopting AI agents. So thank you.